Welcome to our last panel event. Yes. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to say a brief thank you. I'm going to give a land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful moderator and our panelists. So hello, once and again, I am Risa Shoup. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I am a co-executive director of Art New York. Visual description, I am a white person with short dark hair and like reddish brown plastic glasses, black turtleneck, gray jeans, and tan shoes. I really want to thank our staff here at Art New York for making the Fall Forum all that it is. I also want to thank our board for all of their support and ideas. And all of you, our panelists, our guests, you make the conversation great. You find solutions. You're unafraid to name challenges. You really make these events sing. So thank you so much. And now for a land acknowledgement. We would like to take this time to acknowledge that wherever we are currently located on Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America, we are in occupied territory. Art New York's membership in the 5 boroughs of New York City operates on the unceded ancestral land of the Lenape, Wappinger, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Matinecock communities. We want to honor and celebrate all of these indigenous communities, their elders past and present, as well as future generations. We also want to take this time to acknowledge that after there was stolen land, there were stolen people. We want to honor the generations of displaced and enslaved people that built and continue to build the country that we occupy today. And especially for our friends joining us via live stream, and thank you HowlRound and folks supporting us with that. Since we are gathered today in virtual space, let's also take a moment to consider the legacies of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous peoples worldwide. We invite you to join us in acknowledging all this as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, anti-racism, and allyship. The virtual part of that land acknowledgement was written by Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario, Canada. And to learn more about whose land you are on, please visit native-land.ca. And now, so apropos, I think, of thinking about land and ownership and use and responsibility, welcome to Make Space, Take Space, moderated by the wonderful Deadria Harrington, who wears many, many, many hats in our community, but one that we are most grateful for is her role as chair of the Art New York board. Deadria, thank you so much.
Oh, do I need this?
Oh, yeah, no, that's
awesome. Great. Hi, folks. Welcome, welcome. As Risha shared, my name is Deadria Harrington. She, her pronouns. I am a fair-skinned Black woman with curly blonde hair with dark roots. I'm wearing a button-up white shirt with a chunky necklace, some hoop earrings, and some wide-leg black jeans. Welcome to folks in the room as well on the live stream. I'm super excited to chat with this amazing panel of folks who I've gotten to work with, have been to their various spaces. It also feels apt because I feel like most of us, when we think about space, we think of 2 things. One, when we're looking at our budgets, the most expensive thing, right? The thing where we want to always put all of our money into is people. Number 2 is space, right? And then second, it also feels apt as, with this conference, this fall forum being about taking the leap. I think a lot of us reach a point at our organizations where we're thinking about, well, what is that leap? And what is our leap into physical space? Do we get an office, rehearsal room, performance space, etc.? So that also feels so apropos, as well as, of course, one of the things we're experiencing so much as a theatrical community is the loss of so much physical space, from performance spaces to rehearsal spaces. So I'm excited to dive into this topic with our amazing panel. My goal for us today is to really get a 360 view of this conversation around space, to talk about the good, the challenging, the nitty gritty, you know, all of it, not just like, oh, look at this amazing opportunity that's happened and, oh, we figured it out, right? But sometimes it's tough to get to those spaces. Sometimes we have to live in that discomfort. And so I want to talk about that with these folks. And then, of course, we'll also open it up to some questions as well. But first, we're going to do brief introductions of our panelists. So you'll just share your name, pronouns, visual description, and your role / title within the field. And then I have some follow-up questions that are going to ask you more specifically about you and your space / your company's relationship to space. Cool? All right, so Noel, we'll have you kick it off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Noel Allain. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white man, 48 years old, with brown hair, mostly brown still. I don't know, is this beige? A beige sweater and jeans. I'm the artistic director and co-founder of the Bushwick Starr Theater.
I'm Meghan Finn. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman. I have blonde, shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing all black and knee-high, tall black boots. I am the artistic director of the Tank Theater.
Hi, I'm Adam Greenfield. I'm artistic director of Playwrights Horizons. I am a white male with kind of disheveled brownish, grayish hair and a kind of disheveled waffle knit long sleeve t-shirt, jeans, and black rimmed glasses. And my pronouns are he, him.
Good afternoon. My name is Arnaldo Lopez. I am a Latino male, light skin. I am wearing a black shirt, black jacket with an ampersand lapel pin, and I'm wearing jeans. I am managing director with Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, so we're actually going to dive in and start with you, Arnaldo. So Pregones PRTT is a multi-decade steward of two spaces that you all use, reimagine, and share so creatively in Manhattan and also in the Bronx. So would love to just hear about some recent challenges and successes that you found in producing your own work in these venues, a little bit about the magic of the space in the Bronx in particular, and then also sharing and renting your space to other organizations, especially knowing, right, how precious space is as a resource.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's a lot to say, so I'm going to go intuitively, and I want to frame it a little bit in terms of context. For those of you who don't know, Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater is the outcome of the merger of two organizations that were artist-founded, artist-led, and at the center of my thoughts about space, there's the idea of the practice, the artistic practice, place and placekeeping, which has been historically very important for Puerto Rican communities, and historically for the city as a whole, and people, of course. So you know, two organizations founded as touring companies, looking to bring initially live theatrical performances in Spanish to communities across the city. So this idea of hyperlocal, but also hyperlocal touring. So by the time that we were thinking about space, my colleagues, I came in later. So, you know, but by the time they were thinking about space, they were very much thinking, how do we connect the energy of being doing street theater and what we have learned from that experience, and how do we bring that into these spaces. So I want to go back to my initial experience. So, I came to New York City from Pennsylvania, where I had been for 12 years working and studying. I joined a graduate program, and I had heard about both of these companies, hadn't had the chance to experience them live. And somebody said, come to Pregones. We have a group coming to the Bronx. At the time, Pregones occupied a 50-seat studio, and I learned so much just standing in the queue to get in. It was above a furniture store. It was a very intimate space, and among the things I learned pretty fast were that the folks who came to Pregones were both of the neighborhood, but also folks who traveled a significant distance to get there. There was something about the capacity to call on a cultural context that made sense to people, and they were willing to make the effort to arrive. Then there's the idea of the South Bronx itself, which I think in the popular imaginary, there's a lot of stereotypes about the tough streets, about the fires from the 1970s and 80s. So I also was getting a little bit of a schooling on what that energy meant. But above all, there was this community of artists who were working through ensemble practice and who had this idea of hospitality, right? What is the hospitality that these folks that are not necessarily, I want to say, of a homogeneous background, that are not, this is not a place of riches, but culturally it is tremendously dense, and there's a lot to bring to it. So that was the initial snapshot, and the energy that I think has been able to be extended and prolonged, both during my time at Pregones and then with the merger between Pregones and Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. We're now on the 10th year of that merger. I've been with the company for 28 years. And space is very much part of my tenure at Pregones has plenty to do with the acquisition of the Bronx space. So, I go into the studio, 50 seats. I become familiar with that energy for a year or so. And then the artists of the company, and the company has, as part of its ensemble process, one artistic director, two associate artistic directors, very much co-leadership. Before that was, necessarily like a well-known way of doing the work. And they were like looking for the opportunity to have more permanence, right? If you think back to the late 90s, mid and late 90s in the Bronx, it was pre-developers, right? There was a lot of properties that were boarded up that had the potential, but only for those who had the capacity to see it, right? This is before the initial investment and waves of gentrification that can be seen easily now if you travel to the South Bronx. And the idea was find a location that is still in the South Bronx, keep it within a budget that is manageable for a small organization, and really create the partnerships that would make this viable. We are so lucky to be in New York City. New York City is not just culturally rich, but the city provides resources for arts and culture historically, and there is a capital funding cycle for organizations here. That is rare. If you travel, nationally, you'll see how lucky and what an opportunity that is. And our organization set out to build those relationships. So, that's partnership and when I say partnership and relationship building, I really mean that. It's the process of getting elected officials, getting folks in philanthropy, both public and private, to understand our mission, and to appreciate our mission, and for us to understand what aspects of their administration, what aspects of their guidelines and directives really match. So in those conversations, place and space always bubbled up as an investment. I want to say that we fundraised for about 5 years for the acquisition of the property in the South Bronx. It was an old building that really needed to be rethought. So the initial, sort of like the initial highlight of my tenure was that acquisition and capital construction process. The engagement around building the space was all time consuming, really an enterprise that was led by the artistic team at our organization, but also by our board, and primarily by our board as ambassadors going into community and bringing that energy that I talked about, that experience of wanting to be in and to sharing arts and culture in this sort of unique bilingual space, to bring that energy to lift the process of fundraising, and then the years that it took to remake the space. Our space in the Bronx is 120 seats, the theater, and we programmed that space for 11 years before merger. And what did we merge into? We merged into Miriam Colon's historic Puerto Rican Traveling Theater on 47th Street. This is a city-owned property, so a different kind of relationship, but also fundamentally in partnership with local government. We have a long-term lease, and like all of you who do business with the city on the capital side, a cultural covenant, right? This is a commitment that for 30 years, you're going to make sure that these spaces are dedicated to arts and culture and open to a general public. That space was acquired through a similar process that the one that I outlined for Pregones, but much earlier in the mid-70s. It would have been 1977 when the project sort of began to crystallize. That's just 2 years from the time Gerald Ford, decided not to bail out New York City. So if you think about it, it was at that time, Broadway was a lot more discreet than it is now. So the district was still Hell's Kitchen, 47th Street, west of 8th Avenue, was really an entirely different scenario. And it was heavily ethnic, a lot of people from the Caribbean, a lot of Puerto Ricanos in that area. 190 seats, 2 floors. It's one of those old Napoleon Lebrun red brick and steel facades. The facade is landmarked. There's no vertical transport. You have to take the stairs. It's 5 floors. A lot of magic to it. Historically, really one of the first places that featured not only playwrights that are Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, South American, and for Spain. A real vision about linking the Spanish-speaking world, and we're ever grateful to our founder for Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. The merger meant that the same organization was going to program both spaces, so we brought our hospitality, right? That's the energy that we wanted to bring into Manhattan. And thinking of specific challenges and opportunities, I think that distance between the South Bronx and Midtown West, that was the first thing. Like, how do we communicate that? And how do we flip the script, which is typically like, I don't travel north of whatever street, right? and historically, for instance, getting reviewers to come to the Bronx has been sort of a failed mission. And there's still work to do. But we knew that was a generally held perception, and we were very interested in inviting people to think about it differently. So we came up with this sort of promotional tagline about the Bronx Manhattan Theater Express, just reminding people how easy it is to get on the subway and get to Pregones and back. And then the other thing we really wanted was to make sure that we didn't make people think that we were workshopping projects in the Bronx and graduating them to premiere in Manhattan. So, we've been very intentional about premiering projects in the Bronx and not necessarily bringing those projects to Manhattan, and programming both spaces with that intention to make people, to break through any preconceptions and make people identify with the hospitality that the places offer. There are other aspects that are specific to the physical dimensions of the space. Our Bronx space is horizontal with a low ceiling, very, very comfortable by New York standards, very generous in terms of space. Our Manhattan space is the opposite. It's narrow. It's an old firehouse, but it's very tall. So it has a balcony. It's a different canvas, both for the performing team and for the designing team. And the last thing I'll add is that so our practice as an ensemble, we have a seasonal company that has been creating its own repertory now for 40-some years. And those are musical works, and the demands of musical work with live music, with the performers on stage, that has been tremendously challenging, right? There's two very different ways of bringing those works to life, and the times where we have had the same production in both spaces has really meant rethinking these productions from the ground up. And as exciting as that is, it's also something that everybody sweats. So,
yeah. Oh my gosh, Arnold, wow. Just like so many gems. Like also, y'all, like what a treat to have you share with us the history of these two organizations. Like so special to hear, and I've heard bits and pieces. So selfishly, I also really wanted to know. A couple of things that I just want to pull out from what you said, which I think is going to actually bring us around to like the next person I want to highlight and talk about, was this idea of just this partnership between your organization, the community, and the city, and this idea of a cultural covenant. I think like as we're all sort of in this time when we are all like, where are our spaces going? I think about these things that are sort of like, I don't know, maybe they're in the charter somewhere else, right? But what are these tools that we can, these things of precedent that we can really rely on as we're moving forward? As, well, this is an opportunity to create a cultural covenant for this physical space, as I think so many of us are seeing, these empty sky rises and empty office buildings. It's also great because, hearing about Pregones and PRTT and this really sort of long history, I'd love to bring it over to you, Noel, whereas Bushwick Starr has an illustrious history, but you all just opened a brand new space. So yes, woo, woo, woo. So even just seeing your reactions to some of the things that Arnaldo was sharing, I was like, oh yes, that's very fresh. That's very fresh. So just to give you y'all a little bit of info, Bushwick Starr just recently opened up their new space at 419 Elder Street with your critically acclaimed production of Julia May Jonas's A Woman Amongst Women with New Georges, who is also an organization I love and work with. And so congrats on that. And so I would just love to hear a little bit about your experience of opening that new space in 2024, lessons that you've learned. I also think too, Arnaldo was talking about placekeeping. I also know how important y'all's relationship is with the community that you're in, your relationship with the artist Flaco. So I would love to just hear a little bit about that experience.
Yeah.
If it's not too fresh,
It's good to talk about it.
Yes.
It's where to start is the tricky part. I mean, yeah, so much of what you said about hospitality and placekeeping and like invitation is so resonant for me, because I feel like that was, when we were talking to people over this period of time, it took 4 years for us to get to the point where we were opening this new space from when we lost our lease at our old space. I kept repeating this over and over again to people to say, like, you know, the thing that we were able to, that I miss the most, like losing our own space, is the fact that part of the inspiration, part of the joy, part of the like the thing that kept us going, running a space, was in creating a place to invite people into, to say, come over, not just to see the show, come see the show, but also like come into our space. We want to create a space for you to be in, and to thinking about that, the kind of creative act around, I guess, you know, creating that invitation and being hospitable was something that I really missed dearly over those 4 years. And so I also think it's such an important part of having a space is not just creating a place where you can make work, but creating a space where people feel a relationship to it that is beyond just seeing the show. And I had a lot of fear because our old space had, people had a strong relationship to that space, and so did I. And like, there's always that fear that you will open up a new space and people will not feel that feeling anymore. You know, that's kind of a thing that happens, and I was really terrified about that. So I will say it was very gratifying to hear from people that although the new space is you know, a different place, it maintained some of the energy and some of the sense of welcome, and I think, you know, yeah, that energy that we hope to carry over. But your question about what it's like to open a space right now, I mean, it feels a little crazy because there's so much happening in the world, in our world. There's so much happening in the world, but there is in the industry. You know, we're seeing spaces close. There's, I think, over the past 4 years, you've seen some resources be diverted away from the cultural sector in the city, and that's been pretty frightening when we're trying to do something that's a big leap. You know, that leap also, that you use that phrase, and we've been talking about that a lot. Like, it's certainly a big leap, and we didn't have any. You know, we had been thinking about how we would find a more permanent home for the Star for a very long time, because we were in this like rented space in an area that was being increasingly aggressively developed. And you know, I think anyone who is observing what happens in a gentrified area, the writing is on the wall for a relatively small nonprofit where you've are going, okay, at some point we're going to lose this space, so we better start thinking about what we're going to do. And that had led to, you know, thankfully we had like been building relationships with our local electeds for a long time, and our community and other organizations, and doing that work in our neighborhood, which I can talk more about. But those relationships over years really like led to us examining what a move would require. I think at a certain point pre-COVID, we had kind of landed on, we were just essentially waiting, because our council member at the time, Antonio Bernoso, who's now the borough president, had basically said, like, look, if and when we get through this rezoning process in the area, which is still a battle that's going on, it still hasn't happened, because happily we have great council members that are fighting to do that responsibly. But you know, there was going to be a lot of work done in the kind of industrial area that is actually East Williamsburg, but on the other side of Flushing. And he thought there will be opportunities for us to find places for cultural organizations and nonprofits when we are starting to make those plans. So we were just waiting for that. we lost our lease during COVID, but it was not because of COVID. It was because of a long, almost 10-year process of the building becoming a loft building, which meant that people could live there legally. It's a little bit ironic that we started off living there illegally, forming a theater that was legal in the building, and then ended up leaving because it became a residential, legal residence.
Real estate.
Yeah. But that is why we lost our lease. We didn't think we were going to be, purchase was not something we thought was possible. We had a wonderful broker who works with nonprofits, Matt Hopkins, who asked us at some point in the long 6-month period where we were looking, did you ever think about a purchase? And we said, well, yes, in our dreams. And but how do we do that? And he said, well, the issue a lot of nonprofits your size have is that they don't have someone who can really help guarantee a loan to finance a purchase. And luckily we did have, he said, do you have anyone like that? And I said, well, we have one person who is our biggest supporter, who, if it was the right opportunity, we could bring this to as a question. And then I will make a very long story short and just say we found this building. It was this amazing opportunity. It actually did feel within reach, and we pitched it to this person and they said yes. So there was a kind of a miracle moment that happened that I still am in awe of. Was certainly not guaranteed to happen. So I think, whenever people ask about how things get done, I always say a lot of work, hopefully a lot of really talented people working on it, and then some luck is always involved. And this was definitely one of those instances. But then we went through the process of figuring out how we were going to renovate this into a theater, running a capital campaign, the biggest fundraising endeavor by far, that we've ever tried, and had some incredible people that helped make that successful. But over that period of time, certainly saying, oh my God, what are we, what, a lot of anxiety. Yeah, a lot of anxiety about oh my gosh, what's going to happen on the other side of this? Yes. Money, yes, and will it be sustainable, right? And that question certainly hasn't gone away.
Right. Yeah.
But I will say it was extremely heartening to have this wonderful run of a Woman Among Women that started opening this building and seeing people come, being able to host people again, to welcome people again, and have that kind of interaction and feel like we're starting to lay the groundwork for that place. When you talked about being in that space in the Bronx and being there for a certain amount of time, I thought, yeah, in our old space, we literally lived there. So when we started inviting people into it, you didn't need to make a lived-in feeling. We lived there, and this is not the same situation. So we're going to have to do some living in it to get to that place. And but I'm excited about doing that. And so the other side of the anxiety is the hopefulness and the excited. We are excited about having this space. Feeling okay, with all the flux, we own this building. When we did, when you mentioned earlier the idea of what ownership means, what land ownership means. When we signed that deed, I had a mild panic attack because the reality of that really hit me pretty hard. And so I think, when we had our old space, we had an ongoing question about how are we part of this community? What does that mean, and what does it mean for us specifically? And of course, when I talk about the process of discovering that, it's about going to our community, going to the other organizations in our community, the people that we have kind of common cause with, and talking about what are the ways that we can help each other, what are the holes we can help fill, not deciding like what we should do, but finding out what we should do by being in conversation. I think, you know, we are conscious of the fact that we are this kind of white-led organization coming into this community. We are not of the community, and yet through dialogue and through conversation and through and it takes a long time, through years of building those things and continually working together and learning, you can build something that is of the community. And, you know, we have some really exciting, these little moments where I had a teacher for Big Green Theater, which is one of our after-school programs, teach last year, who was a student the first year we did it, who was like a 5th grade student the first year we did it. And that kind of arc, like this is one person, there's more than one example, but that kind of arc is when you start to see a kind of ambition, a hope, like materialize and become real. Those things are just starting to happen now because it takes a decade or more to start to really build you know, that kind of, I think, integrated place in a community when you are like kind of introducing yourself into it. So lots more to say about that, but I don't want to take up too much more time. But
thank you for all of that. Some things that continue to, you know, percolate, right? This idea of really about building long-term relationships, right? With the artist, with the people in the space, in the place, the neighborhood that you're with, as well as with our government officials, right? I think we're all sort of thinking about the way in which I think advocacy is going to play a really strong role in the years to come, and how are we building those relationships and knowing that it's going to take investment in time and these sort of invitations, which brings me to you, Adam. Oh, once again, this is Deidre speaking, but which brings me to you, Adam. You know, as the artistic director at Playwrights Horizons, you know, I've had the privilege at the Movement Theatre Company to be invited into your space for a number of projects. The way that you all are now opening your space to Soho Rep is there, you know, in the midst of, you know, re-examining their relationship and needing space. And then also, to you all have a new program coming up as well, called Unplugged. So I would just love to just hear you talk a little bit about the ideas around space partnerships, and how you all, who have this amazing, beautiful building on 42nd Street, have looked at opening those doors, how you make those decisions, what lessons you've learned while opening those doors, all of that.
Yeah, this is Adam speaking. When I think about what is the theater that I hope Playwrights Horizons to be and function as in the city, I would like for Playwrights Horizons to be felt and experienced as a building, as an organization that is as vibrant, as contradictory, as unexpected and aggressively eclectic as New York City itself. So, and that is, I think in some ways when I think about New York City and I think about like how I describe New York City, I always, my brain always goes straight to Jane Jacobs and her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, in which Jane Jacobs describes it as being a very human-made, I'm totally paraphrasing Jane Jacobs, I'm sorry, a very human-based city that is designed around the way humans behave, as opposed to the city of Robert Moses, which is a city that is designed around architectural principles or ideological principles, and then humans are expected to kind of adjust to the architecture in which they're put. So I really believe in like the human-born nature of New York City, and when I look at like the building of Playwrights Horizons, I hope to create the same thing, and one of the ways I've been looking at that is just fill the building, always fill the building with as much as many artists as possible, as many people as possible, as many audiences as possible, as much work as possible, all the time. And it's in those like chance encounters between people that community gets formed and vibrancy happens, and artistic movements begin to become shaped. And that's what I think New York City is so good at. There's a thing that Jane Jacobs, there's a diagram in her book that shows the grid of New York City, and then Broadway as the diagonal slash through the grid. And by being a diagonal slash through a grid, you're creating all of these courtyards and squares, which are gathering places for people. Like Union Square, Times Square, Herald Square, there's all places that are created by Broadway. And I kind of feel like that diagonal slash is what I kind of hope Playwrights Horizons can be. So for me, it comes down to how do you get people? You just when you have empty space, you just invite people in, and it's been one of my like long-term pursuits to be cool. Ever since I
Join
failed
the club.
Yeah, ever since I failed at that when I was in high school, so I think I just like there's artists who I admire, and groups who I admire, and I just kind of want them to come in and interact with us. So it made sense when we had some extra space in our season. We wanted to bring in the Movement Theatre Company. We have in the past. We've worked with the Writer Army. We've worked with many other organizations in the past that we feel like would come in and kind of disrupt the way we normally work, and to break the routine for us, and to make us re-examine the way we work. We had a residency program. We also have a theater school, which is at 440 Lafayette, just across the street from the Public. So we have space that we rent to run the school, and that space isn't always used all year round for the school. And so we created a resident company program where we were just giving space to Club Thumb, Musical Theater Factory, and Space at Writer Farm, which each of those organizations are very much like hubs of. Each of those organizations have their own community. Mm-hmm. So we feel it's our goal to say like, well, we have our community interacting with their community, and who knows what will happen. It's in those conversations in the hallways that we really want to foster. When Soho Rep came to us, having confronted the impending loss of their space in Tribeca, that was, it felt to me like just great. I know it's difficult for Soho Rep, and I don't want to speak for Soho Rep, but I do know that space was offered them a lot of challenges, and I think being asked to leave that space, the Walker space, I think allowed them to see new opportunities for what Soho Rep might become, and when they came to Playwrights Horizons to say, can we, in the interim, take up residence with you, it seemed I seem cooler because I'm around Soho Rep, which is the coolest theater. But also, yes, we are invested in the continuation of Soho Rep because, gosh, I feel like I'm throwing so many ideas in there. I'm so sorry. But there's if you think about theater, like Playwrights Horizons is only going to be good at Playwrights Horizons if Soho Rep is good at being Soho Rep. And we can only succeed at what we're doing if other companies that are in our ecological system are thriving. It's like we only thrive if they're all thriving. Yes. So it was an easy answer to say, yes, we want to support Soho Rep in that transition. But along the way, I will say, as an artistic director of a theater that has the history that Playwrights Horizons has, I feel like there's a little bit of another sort of sneaky motivation I have, which is that it allows me to take some more risks and get more audacious in ways that might seem out of character for Playwrights Horizons, because I'm associating us with a company like Soho Rep that is like
that is apeshit. So there is that, and I think that in doing so, we can learn from the way Soho Rep works and the way they work with artists, and hopefully some of that will rub off on us over time. And so the partnership feels really symbiotic in that way, artistically and philosophically, ideologically, and then also it just addresses both of our needs. They need a space, and in this current moment in theater, when it's harder to fill your building all the time with your own work, and we have 2 stages, and we're, like every theater, we're struggling against the forces that would reduce our programming. I never want to have the building sitting empty. So to have the Soho Rep artists and community traveling through our building throughout the year and making us feel actually like maybe there's actually more going on in our building in this coming year than we can really sustain, that feels right to me. That feels like it should be more happening than we can really contain. So that's kind of the Soho Rep collaboration and the way we share space and offer space to people. We understand that we're lucky to have a building, we're grateful to have a building, and we understand that space is a commodity, and we want to give that support to others. The Unplugged program, I hope I'm not going on too long. The Unplugged program is like kind of a different conversation entirely, and maybe the subject of some other panel. But like I've always felt like this. At the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all looking at like, well, what are we gonna do? What is theater supposed to look like? I think I'm not alone in turning back to Peter Brook and going back and dusting off my copy of The Empty Space by Peter Brook, but also Towards a Poor Theater by Jerzy Grotowski, and sort of thinking about these thinkers who I was studying, whose thoughts I was studying in college about theater and the necessary theater and what it actually does it take to make theater, and to think about when we were unable to occupy our spaces and had to think about making theater differently. It kind of begs the question is like, what is the necessity of theater? What are the needs that you have in making theater? And it began to really open my eyes to the ways in which we are all overproduced. We as a theater community at large, I think, tend towards overproduction of plays, that all of our budgets have inflated over time, and that's inflated audience expectations for what they're going to see on stage, which then encourages us to inflate what we're able to do, and it's this train that keeps moving as we begin to produce shows on bigger and bigger budgets, which forces us to raise ticket prices higher and higher, that at some point you kind of have to get off the train. And it was hard at Playwrights Horizons to be in our building to sort of conceive of like, how do you go back and do a play that's on a bare stage with nothing when audiences don't expect that from us. So we decided to just make it programmatic, and we created an Unplugged program where we put together a list of, it's kind of the rules of engagement, where we're saying sets must be, this is just for one, we're trying this out with one production next season. And we put out a targeted call for submissions to writers who specifically want to submit their play to be considered for this producing model. And it is, sets are not built, but sets are assembled of previously existing materials. There's no lighting rentals. People have to use only what's in stock. No sound rentals. Productions have to use only what we have in stock. Costumes, we put some parameters on that, like costumes will be mostly pulled but not built. No wigs. We also are saying like no automation, no blood, no glitter, no animals. That like there's these rules of engagement, and everybody agrees that that's what we're not going to do. We can actually reduce the costs of producing, and hopefully that will allow us over time to be able to produce more theater with fewer resources, because that's the trend that theaters are experiencing. Like, I don't want to produce less than, I don't want to reduce our programming. That to me seems sad. Mm-hmm. I want to try to produce more and more, and to learn about ways to do it by reallocating where the money's going towards people and away from things. So we put out a targeted call for submissions. We received over 900 submissions, and we're currently rooting our way through those. And we're kind of aiming towards we have this goal of including our first unplugged production in our next season. So stay tuned for more information about that. There's a lot we still don't know, but we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
That's
And I think
awesome.
what's so interesting, Adam, that you're bringing up this idea of this sort of like bigger is better in terms of production scale, scope, and size. I mean, at the Movement, we're all about like big, go big or go home, but also this idea of what is that sort of inflation doing to the way that of the expectations that our audiences are having. How are we mitigating that? How are we sort of like right-sizing that with the resources that we have in this funding environment, as well as, Noel, what you were talking about of like, losing the space not because of COVID, because I think that we like to think that all of these space shifts and challenges are, so tied to COVID and the pandemic, when in fact the seeds of all of this, like the writing was all on the wall prior to 2020, and now we've just sort of reached this apex in hearing you all sort of talk about, well, how are we meeting this challenge? How are we dealing with these real, struggles? And this idea of sort of like maximalization in terms of the invitation of who we're inviting in, of bringing more people into the space resources that you all have, which I think brings us, to you, Meghan, and just the work that you all do at the Tank, as well as having just received the 2024 Dave Rip Prize. Woo woo! And I think of the Tank as just being an organization that's really been about invigorating NYC theaters and using of spaces and venues. So I would love for you to just talk a little bit about Revenue NYC, which I know is sort of built from the model of the Tank. Just
Sure.
Take it away.
So imagine, many of you don't have to imagine it because you've worked there. It's right across the street. But imagine a festival that just never ended, ever, for 21 years. And that's the Tank. So to say I had the opportunity to apply for this prize, all of you do too. It's an annual prize for 5 New Yorkers. I encourage you to apply, not only for the shock of having that opportunity, but also because if you do have an idea, a big idea for arts and culture, I'm honored that I was the first winner within culture, but this has opened up the conversation about how winners should be considered from culture. So if you do have a big idea, what it does is give you this. It's a year-long process, essentially, of going to them and doing different proposals and submissions. But also, for me, it allowed me to take this idea of Revenue NYC and have multiple conversations with stakeholders and other artists and with Anne Washburn at the Murder Room and really unpack like what this was. So it's the process of it is invaluable. I would say just even applying and going through that. So the Tank, we provide free space and resources to around 3,000 artists every year. I think what you're talking about a space is not sitting empty, right? This is a critical piece. Right now, I think that we're struggling right now. We're losing venues. We're looking around and we're saying, like, what are we going to do, right? We're saying, okay, hey, funders, are you coming? Some of them are saying yes. Some of them are saying no. And so what do we have to work with, right? We have the spaces that we have left. One thing that the David Prize, they do a lot of due diligence. They pick up and they cold call people. It's terrifying. They would have conversations and they'd come, and then they'd say, we talked to several stakeholders who say there's all these theaters that are being in use 20% of the time. And that's like a trend we're seeing in the research that we're doing. And I would say, yep. That's correct. And they're real estate people. So, not all of them, but that didn't make any sense to them. Why would you have these spaces and have them sitting empty? So everything that you're talking about resonates with me completely. Yeah. So we have to look around, in my view, and look at what we do have right now. And we do have spaces that aren't in use all the time. And they not only have theaters, but they have lobbies and they have studios. This is a theater. We're sitting in a theater right now. And we know who runs it. So, so we know people. So so that's one resource we already have, right? The spaces that we still have. And so we need to focus on that right now because that is an important thing. Those relationships, those conversations are important. Then we have artists. We still have artists. And what I see every day at the Tank is that audiences follow artists. The way our model works is we maximize the use of space, probably to a state. I don't think you'd want to fight that battle, but we maximize it to a blinding level. It's because we do multiple shows. This is not new. This is how spaces have existed. But I like to describe it as like a luxurious permanent fringe, right? We have a lot of work happening so that we're constantly full. We are constantly having new audiences, and we're in this state, right? This is such a critical part of this whole thing. It can't go away. We can't lose the Connolly. We can't lose the Wild Project. We can't lose all of these little spaces and expect that everything up the chain is going to be fine. And you're right. That's been going on for a long time. We have to. People learn when they come to the city. They learn from artists a very important thing, which is how to pay for culture. Which is how to say, maybe it's $15, right? But I'm learning that this is something that has value, and I'm going to pay for it. So that is a critical piece too. So we have artists, we have spaces, we have to think creatively about how we're using them. Also, we have, I've known Noel for 20 years almost now. There's all of these. Whenever we have a job posting for the Tank, for just a level, we're a small organization of 6 people, but in the turnover, 6 full-time, 1 million part-time. But but when we post for a job, the people that come in, or we have a producers cohort that we do, the people that come in for these interviews are ready to run theaters. They're ready. I'm sitting there and I'm interviewing them for a level entry job, and I'm like, no, they're Noel and Sue. Do you know, if they were in the right spot and they would stay the long nights like you did. Yeah. They were ready, they want it, right? But how do we connect those with theaters who could use that energy, right? Leaders that are hanging on to a space, they're like, oh, am I still getting cut? Did I just lose my funding again from this? They could use that energy, right? And so the thing that the whole idea of Revenue was let's take the Tank's model, which we actually learned during the pandemic, was a big part of how we sustain ourselves, right? As soon as we kind of hit the ground running after we were able to get through that, we started saying, well, my earned revenue is 50% of my budget. Right? That's not because I have a big show that I have to sell. It's because I have a bunch of tiny shows that sell. Yeah. And the artists can leave with money, right? And so the whole thing about community and space, when you have a space where someone comes in, they get to feel heard, and they get the access to space that they can't afford, and then they leave with money in their pockets. We when I first started at the Tank almost 8 years ago, we had a little space on 46th Street. God bless it. It's great, okay? But it was on an 8th floor in Times Square. It made me have PTSD from auditions when I first moved here when I was 23, It's just this little hole in the wall. The artists, when we left, they were miserable. They were we're going to a space, we have 2 theaters. They were like, what are you doing? Are you out of your mind? This is our home, right? This is our special place, because they were treated with respect. They were invited in, they left with money. They felt like this is for us. And then they slowly did that with this space, but that's huge, right? It doesn't really matter where it is. You can create that anywhere. Mm-hmm. So with those 3 things, the space we already have, the artists, and the talent we have, the untapped talent for artistic leadership I guarantee there's 10 of them in this room right now
Yeah.
that are ready to run a theater. And if we could take this model, right, that we were using at the Tank that has such a high earned revenue and do it at a space where the rent isn't my rent, right? Where the rent is like what Noel's rent was back in the day. Maybe a little higher, maybe twice that, but still.
We got lucky.
You could use this model and generate revenue for the theater and generate revenue for the artists and begin to build what we've built over at the Tank.
Yeah. And Meghan, a couple of things that just, and Adam, what you talked about as well, right? There's something actually really magical that happens about being, even if you're not like in deep relationship, partnership with people, with organizations, with artists, but the way that being in proximity to each other can push your organization to think more creatively, can push your organization to take bigger risks, can also, and also Meghan, this idea of like, oh, these people coming in who you're like, oh, they're ready to run theaters as well, right? When we start thinking about, succession planning, right? Which is a thing that nobody likes to think about and we all need to be thinking about all the time. Where are the spaces for upcoming arts leaders to learn and flex that muscle? Because there is stuff that you're not gonna know until you're sitting late at night in your theater and you're like, I don't know how to get the lights to turn on, and those creative problem solve. So I think what's so interesting about this conversation, right? We're talking about physical space, but it's about so much more than just the physical space, right? That becomes the meeting space for the community, for the businesses. And I do want to open up to questions, but one of the questions that I have, but which maybe we'll skip, so maybe just percolate on it, that I think about as well with when you have a physical space is the tendrils that reach out into the community, those local businesses. How are we actually all interconnected and need each other in order to sustain, whether we're a theater bringing artists in or a small, restaurant, bar, or even like all the random hardware stores, right?
Listen, the city did a study right before the pandemic, 2019, and found that small theaters were responsible for $1.3 billion in revenue for the city. Okay, so we matter. Mm-hmm. We're a revenue. We're an economic driver, and and it's exactly true. Anyway, okay. Not talking about it anymore.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
And I'll just say, if you don't know about the Laundromat Project and the work that Laundromat Project is doing, definitely check out what they're doing, because that's exactly what you're talking about, Deidre.
Yeah.
Like they're doing work in community. It's like it's inspiring.
Yeah. So I'd love to open it up for a couple of questions from the audience, either here. In the room, or I don't know if somebody's monitoring the live stream. That's all right. Any questions from audience members in the room? Yeah. And just say your name, pronouns.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nick. Thank you all so much. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe that 2 massive theaters recently in New York City were built for like around $500 million each. Pack NYC and the Shed. Mm-hmm. Part of me is like, oh wow, what would it be like if that money was distributed among artists, right? But it also is like they're closed a lot of the times, and that's one of the reasons why I'm bringing it up. And they do amazing work, and I've really been glad to go there. But part of it is an architectural problem. Like they have to have a tremendous number of people there to keep the building open, because like to get actually up to the theater at the Shed is like a very long journey which requires guidance. And so I guess I'm just wondering like if there's anything that you've noticed that can help as theaters are getting built, if in the future, or that people can do to make sure that they can be open, that they can afford to be open.
That's a big question. I think you're touching on a number of things. I'll go the roundabout way and say that this ecosystem for live arts is enormous. It's enormous, and each of us lives in a part of it and then tries to build connections across. And that's what keeps us together, and that's how this symbiosis is able to happen. I think for largely scaled institutions, especially ones that are seeded, funded, and constructed and publicized sort of fast, that obeys a certain logic of tourism, that obeys a certain logic of the new New York. Hudson Yards we're still not unable to process what that is, as a big chunk of Manhattan, and what that means for New York. And you'll get 1,000 opinions about it, but it's always the logic of that we all rise together is real, and I do think that that may not be always apparent, but I think that's one of the sort of electrical currents that keeps us alive.
I feel like there's some contradictions in our field that we struggle with, and you're naming one of them. I mean, running a theater or arts institution requires a lot of people in different positions, and these are jobs too. Like it's not the people getting opportunities at theaters are not just on the stage, and we've had a really fantastic, I think, revolution in terms of pay equity and what people should be paid and how they should be paid. That is wonderful because it means people have jobs and they're getting paid what they should be. It also means the theaters and institutions are under this new financial strain that is either creating, it's creating the kind of tension I think, Adam, you're talking about, where it's are we doing less so we can pay people more, or are we finding ways of doing things for less so that we can balance all of this? So the kind of economic drivers that arts organizations are in theaters are the way that we are situated in communities and affect all the businesses around us, generate revenue, and yet our business model is not one, right? We are nonprofits for the most part in the nonprofit sector. A lot of our theaters are nonprofits, and we need outside support in order to make all the things we make. So I guess the only answer I'd say is I think there is a Ananda, what you're saying, this impulse in terms of New York City and cultural development. It's it has to be big, these big monuments to culture, and there's a tendency to forget that the smaller, more lean operations are actually more sustainable, are where innovation happens. They're part of that ladder up to the bigger places, and I think, unfortunately, the answer has to be in investment in those places, and continuing to fight for that.
Yeah. And this is Deidre, and I think something I know I'm still working on it. I think something too. Oh, where's it going? About especially under what you were talking about, of these things that are built big and fast, that are really for a tourist market, right? I think it's also about what is it that we, as New Yorkers, right, who live and work in this city, right? What is it that we need? Where is it that we want to go so that we can feel, all the feels, the magic of being in a space? And oftentimes that is about us going to a space that is smaller, that is more deeply connected to a community. Yeah. And I think, Noel, bringing up this idea of, a business model, one, I think most of our organizations don't actually have a business model. We're just we just have to figure out how to make ends meet. And I think, Meghan, what you're talking about is, what does it look like for us to have a strategic business model when we're looking at the running of the space, the financing of the space, and that can go hand in hand with mission-driven work, and us doing all the things to check the boxes for being a not-for-profit. But I think that's just something that's so exciting that
absolutely. And I think when I we all like to have nice things. We like fancy theaters, and they have their place, and but also I think it stings maybe a bit too when you have the part of the sector that includes the development space, like the space where all those artists began, is shrinking or feeling like we're just barely hanging on, and then you have these big things opening up at the same time. I think that what I often feel, however, is that we can't keep wringing our hands that we are on an island that's 13 miles long, and there are 8 million people here, so we should just figure out how to get them in. And I do feel like these spaces too, they're actually not divorced from any of this tension either. They're experiencing the ramifications of this tension up the ladder. And so if they find ways to bring us in or bring artists in, make it easier, and it doesn't have to be all the time, right? And it doesn't have to be the only thing they do, but it should be a part of every one of those institutions should have that easy way that at least for some of the time we're inviting new people in, Yeah.
So. Is there another question? Yeah. Thank you, Nikki.
I'm curious how all of you manage the exhaustion of everything that you're programming and all of the artists that you're supporting, and also having like real estate in this city where there's so much money that is not in our sector, and on top of like all of your other things you do in your life, like know people and have families and go biking.
This is Meghan Finn. And I wake up every morning and I look in the mirror and I say, nothing's gonna fucking stop me. And I would just say that it's a nice thing for yourself, so just try it. I'll let people say other things.
I mean, I'm gonna pick up on your biking comment too, though, because like if you ride a bike in New York City, for people who I think don't ride a bike in New York City, and I love riding a bike in New York City. To me, it's my favorite way of experiencing the city. Like, you think about the entire city and the concept of riding your bike through the entire city, and that feels insane and daunting. But if you actually think about, well, I'm actually just riding on this one block at this one time, and you turn the corner and like, I'm just navigating this block and I'm navigating that block, like I kind of feel like, and I've definitely, I run a little bit anxious, but I find my way through it is to say like, I'm doing the things that are in front of me today, and I'm going to get done as much as I can today. And if I don't do it all, that has to be okay, and I have to make peace with that. But it is, but then there's other days where I'm like, I don't actually have a good answer to your question, which is like, I don't know where the energy is going to come from.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely days. I think all of that. I'm not going to repeat it. Yes, and also what helps me on days when I'm feeling especially tired or desperate is to remind myself how much I love my work, or I get to do this. That's a real thing. It sounds kind of Pollyanna, but like I think that is a very, I go to a place where feels like it's a very Sisyphean task, pushing the boulder up the hill, and yet like that is the place I want to be. There are definitely days where burnout feels very real, but I think when you give yourself that moment, you have to give yourself moments to like say, I'm not able to, you prioritize, of course, but like, I'm just not I'm letting this go today. I am letting this email go. I'm going to go to sleep now, like things like that. You have to do that in order to then get up and push the boulder up the hill again. But
or like I screwed up, but I did the best that I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think exhaustion is real, and filling the plate with too much is real. You don't get to do the work in this particular system without that. But I think the benefits, so to speak, outweigh these cons. And speaking specifically from the context of communities of color, this is movement work. So it's mission driven. It's the marathon. It's not the sprint. And hiving is where you draw that energy, right? So whether it's this community in Art New York, in my case, there is the Latinx consortium, Latinx Arts Consortium, LXNY. There's the Alliance of Latino Theaters New York, just to give two tangible examples of places where there are other people doing the work, and this is community. This is community work, and that's always a fuel.
Yeah. Yep. Oh.
Or you have a question.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you all. What programs, if any, do you have to train the future you?
Well, this is Megan, obviously. We have a producers cohort that we started about 3 years ago now for emerging producers to essentially work kind of embedded with us, working on our bigger productions. And in that, both that and we have a paid internship program, and I do feel like the next generation of indie theater people are coming out of that with regularity, and then being immediately stolen by my friends to work at their companies. So yeah, I think that there's, I feel like we're uniquely positioned because we're so small and nimble that people can really get hands-on experience and then can engage as an artist very soon after they leave as one of those programs. And so that's just a lucky part of what we do. It's not true for everybody, and nor should it be. But so those are 2 programs that we have.
In our case, we have a number of tracks that are sort of programmatic. So we have a space grants opportunity, which comes with the option to engage anybody on staff for mentoring or learning. And there is a version of that that's specifically for artists to self-produce a project. So we give them a modest budget, and we again offer the company's resources as a way for them to either get their feet wet, or in the cases where they've already done that, how do you graduate? We invite them to name what's the graduation for them in that experience. And then besides that, we are in the process of outlining a new artistic associate track. This is very much as part of a succession plan, and that has a different and more formal employment component to it, but always keeping it nimble and trying to hear, what is it that younger generations are looking to do. And one of the things that sort of jumps at me is, the struggle with the 501c3 identity, and what that means both for preparing themselves and for pushing forward. And I do think that a number of the artists that have participated from these programs are choosing alternatives that are not nonprofits.
I don't know if you all have anything you want to add.
We have a fellowship program at Playwrights that has a pretty good roster of people who've worked through it. But we also have an undergraduate program, the Playwrights HorizonsNoel Theater School, that operates through NYU. We're one of the partner studios at NYU. We have 200 students, and the pedagogy of the program is really to train those artists not as actors but as theater makers, so that they're learning lighting design, stage management, producing, acting. They're learning they're learning theater from every angle, which we hope will then prepare them to begin to self-produce once they graduate.
And where we're at right now, I'll say, is we have some paid internship opportunities. We decided during the last 4 years that we weren't going to be having internships that weren't at least paid like an hourly wage as opposed to just like a stipend. So that's somewhat reduced the possibilities, unfortunately, but we do have paid internship positions for our teaching positions and also for summer, and are, now that we're back in our space, continuing to grow the number of, there are lots of institutions that basically like do pay their students to have an internship, so that's always a really great match as well. And then we're growing happily. We're able to start growing our staff a little bit so that there are associate positions, which are, I think, really important learning opportunities for someone who isn't ready to maybe helm a department, but is ready to really learn those responsibilities and start to take them on. And the intention of that certainly is that they then, after a few years, are ready to take that next step. And we have an ambition that we've been working on for a while in terms of production, to start a production fellowship, because I think a lot of students, especially in our area, are interested in that part of the theater making, and it's part of our mission in our neighborhood to grow our workforce of local hires as well. So,
I would just add that this project that I'm piloting right now, Revenue NYC, the idea is that it's staffed up for each pilot. So also it is just organically a way to kind of try to pull in, as I'm having these conversations, try to pull in these people that are ready for artistic leadership, that could come in and produce, get to know an institution on a temporary basis when they're there as the producer, as working with programming. So I think that that's another benefit of it, that it could be helpful for emerging creative producers.
Yeah, awesome. So I have one final question to just sort of close us out. We're talking about taking the leap, right? So we're going to take a leap in our minds and dream, into the perfect, ideal future. In New York City, what would space look like for you? Whether it's the space that you currently have, your dream for space for the city, what resources would you have? Outside of, of course, millions of dollars to do whatever we want. But what's a dream, something you hope for in terms of space and your relationship to it, or the city's relationship to space?
Wow.
Maybe I'll answer to give these folks a chance to think about it.
Wait, say your name one final time.
Megan, sorry, this is Megan. So piloting this project, I'm hoping in the next year and a half, we started it, we did a pop-up, we did 29 shows at Paradise Factory on East 4th Street in September. I'm talking to different companies, both mid-sized, larger theaters, smaller, tiny venues, places where people live, kind of everything in between. I would like to pilot the project in the next year and a half at all these different venues and kind of learn best practices, how it's going to be different depending on the size of the organization. Then I would like it to become, and this is not me trying to franchise the Tank. In fact, it's branded separately from the Tank because it isn't. I think the Tank should be, I always said, when I started working at the Tank, we were a $475,000 organization. Now we're at 1.7 million. I always said when we were 1.5, we would be fine. That would be as big as we get. And now we're 1.7. I don't think we should get much bigger, because I think actually the size we are is appropriate. But I would like to have an entity that fills the space. So when someone loses a renter, when a venue loses a renter, and they could just be okay, I'm gonna just call Revenue, and then we're going to activate it quickly, so that we were seeding this kind of work all over the spaces in the city, filling the weeks that they need, giving them revenue. And then I would like there to be 2 to 4 spaces running in the exact same financial model as the Tank, in completely different communities with completely different artists having nothing to do with the Tank whatsoever. Just taking that model and allowing them to be the spaces that we miss. We don't, the spaces that we do not have currently. We don't have PS 122 isn't like, there's not that kind of energy, there's not that kind of spaces. We need, I think, in order to, we have a pipeline issue. And so my dream would be to see 2 to 4 other theaters just on their own in totally different communities, maybe completely different aesthetics, but just running in the same model to just be supporting the thousands of artists that really need space right now. So yeah, that's my dream.
Cool. I don't know if I think you.
There's a number of things that come to mind. One is producing models. So it's similar in some ways to what you were saying about Unplugged. So we're really interested in producer models that are mission-based and aligned, and where we bring both commercial producers and nonprofit artists to sort of explore and find ways that are joyful and not strictly budget-driven. Then on the more speculative side, and because we have a long-time commitment to free programming, we actually love free programming, and our communities love free programming. I do dream of a season that's entirely free, the entire season. I think that there's room for that, and that we just need to continue to think of what subsidy is and how it comes about. And the last bit is I love the idea. We've had really good fortune working in green spaces at different times of the year, and we actually own a modest little garden which is community tended. And I would love to see more hybrid, like live performance green spaces throughout the city. That would be so awesome.
I would say for Playwrights Horizons space, I would hope that we can become to be known as a center more than a theater, that it's a place that is always has such eclectic things happening around it all the time that you think of it as like, I don't know what I'm doing today and I don't know what's happening over there, but I bet if I go over there, there'll be somebody interesting or something interesting happening. So I would love for that to happen. And I guess for the city, what I would hope is that like the form of that in spaces that are new spaces that are created, the form meets the content a little bit better. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things I was thinking about, some of the new larger spaces that you were mentioning earlier, like Pack Center and the Shed. Like I don't think that these are designed to welcome people in. I think that these are designed by people who don't have that interest. And I think in some ways there's buildings which are designed to keep people out. And I would hope that if, in the interest of producing theater that's for the city, that whoever is making the choice about what architect to hire and what are the values and the priorities of that architecture, it feels a little bit more like a library or a train station than it does like an office building. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we've just kind of done this, which has been a lovely thing where, we used to be nestled up on the second floor of a building and you couldn't get up there unless you had a ticket to come see a show or you were coming up to have a meeting or something. And we really wanted to get that access issue, not to mention we didn't have an elevator and we were up a very rickety set of stairs. We wanted to move past that. So having a space on the ground floor that has a storefront and having a lobby for the first time that is we're slowly like putting this out, but now you will all know the lobby is open. We have open lobby hours Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, where it's just like a co-working space where you can come in, sit down at any of the tables we have there. There's, bathrooms, Wi-Fi, water, just kind of the basics, but the same thing that places like the Signature or CSC are doing, but that kind of feeling you're talking about, like you can come in here, it's not closed to you, it's a place that people can feel ownership of even if they're not coming with a ticket in their hand. And that is extremely gratifying to be like realizing that vision. And then I will say, the irony is, of course, you get greedy. And not just like, I want twice the amount of space now. We have more space than we ever had before, and now I want twice as much. And it's not just because I want to luxuriate in big spaces, but you very quickly realize the limitation of any space, and I want more room for more artists to work. I want more capacity for people to gather in different ways, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that kind of opening, though, is what I'm talking about, is like spaces, these are not, and I guess going back to what I was saying earlier, spaces that are not just about coming to see a show. They are art centers that are community oriented in the sense that like they are places to go, the places to be, the same way that we think of your favorite cafe or park or place that you like to be because you like being there. It feels good to be there, and you feel like it is yours in the same way that the city gives us those places. Theaters and art spaces should be part of that landscape.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Noel, Meghan, Adam, Arnaldo. Thank you, Nikki, for curating this panel. And before we go, speaking of making feeling like a space is ours, one of our spaces, the Wild Project, is having a tough time right now, and we can all support them. They've got a capital campaign that's going. Visit thewildproject.org. A couple bucks, like it all helps and really shows that they've got us as a theater community behind them as they're facing this challenge. So as we continue to try to hold on to the spaces that we do have. Thank you once again, panelists, our interpreters, everybody, our live stream folks who helped make today happen. And Nikki.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, live stream. And I just want to do one more round of applause for our panelists by the incredible Deadria Harrington.